Welcome back to my coverage of the second season of Rings of Power. So far, very little has actually happened, and I for one can't wait until the plot actually gets moving so that I can begin to rip and tear. Ripping and tearing an emaciated carcass is not a particularly productive exercise, but Season 1 managed to have the occasional episode in which something actually happens, so let's see how long it takes for something to happen in Season 2. We return to Khazad-Dum for the first time since Episode 7 of Season 1. The last thing we saw was Durin and Disa discussing how the time is nigh for them to rule the dwarves, as King Durin has grown too old and too weak. Actually, the last thing we saw was the Balrog, but whether we will be seeing him again anytime soon is anyone's guess. In Season 1, Durin was demoted from his status as a dwarf lord, and we learn through this conversation, as well as the fact that they are shopping at a commoner's market, that Durin is trying to save money so as to plan for the future. He is aware of the fact that his income is lesser than it was. His priorities were set up very clearly in Season 1. He wants to be a good father to his children, and he wants to be a good son to his father. After the events of Season 1, Durin's relationship with his own father may well have been irreparably damaged, which means his focus is now on being a good father himself. This is good. The writers have acknowledged the consequences the events of Season 1 have had on the day-to-day lives of Durin and Disa, and this is conveyed to the audience via somewhat natural dialogue. As for how exactly the finances of Khazad-Dum work, I have no idea, because although Durin is no longer a dwarf lord, he is still the Prince of Khazad-Dum, and so one might have expected that his wealth would not be impacted. Anyway, Durin tells his wife that he feels ashamed that he is unable to provide for his family.
You married a prince, and now you're bound to an outcast.
But Disa replies that she is bound to the dwarf she loves, and this brief dialogue exchange reminds me why I liked these two characters whenever they were not sharing scenes with Elrond. The actors are more than competent, and their relationship feels genuine, unlike virtually every other relationship in Amazon's Middle-earth. The bond these two have is one of the only things that was not broken by the end of Season 1, and more than anything else, it is the thing I am dreading being shattered in Season 2. Disa asks Durin if he has spoken to his father, and Durin has not even tried to make contact because he believes the king would not agree to see him, which is informed by the fact that Durin is an exceptionally proud individual. I will address Disa's motive for wanting the Durins to reconnect later. Before the conversation can continue, the ground starts rumbling, which Disa notices first, and she yells for the other dwarves to brace themselves. During the ensuing quake, some dwarves are squashed by a large chunk of falling rubble. They are never mentioned again, but I noticed. Rest in pieces. The city then goes dark as a result of the quake displacing their mirror system, and the dwarves realize they have lost their ability to grow food. On that point, the dwarves have quite an elaborate setup involving mirrors to reflect sunlight into their underground domain so that they can grow crops, which I actually quite like. I have no idea if this would work at all. My guess would be that no, it would not. But I like that some thought was actually put into the practicalities of living in a huge subterranean city. This opening scene from Episode 2, I don't really have any criticisms of. It is admittedly simple, but it efficiently and naturally conveys what it needed to convey without employing the usual kind of ham-fisted nonsense that the characters in Amazon's Middle-earth are typically forced to deliver. Given the fact that I am rather familiar with this show at this point, sorry to sound cynical, but I suspect it's all downhill from here. Okay, we have Durin is ashamed of being poor, wants to provide for his family, protects his wife, and Disa loves her husband for who he is, and wants the Durins to reconnect. Galadriel then remembers that her brother Finrod exists, and she places some seeds next to his grave. In case you don't remember, her husband Celebrimbor was also presumably killed in the same war against Morgoth. What Galadriel explicitly tells us in Season 1 is that she lost both her brother Finrod and her husband Celebrimbor. We know that Finrod's body was recovered, although we don't know why or how, and if we take the slightest glance in the direction of the source material, we know that Celebrimbor is not actually dead. Galadriel, however, does not know this. She does not have confirmation of Celebrimbor's death, because his body was never recovered, but she does know that he went missing 1,000 years ago and she has not seen him since. Which means either that he eloped to be with someone less abrasive and entitled, meaning that he can choose from literally anyone else in Middle-earth, or he has indeed died. There is, however, no grave for Celebrimbor. There has only been one single mention of Celebrimbor, and Galadriel does not and has never shown any hint of a desire to find him, to mourn him, or to confirm if he is actually dead. Anyway, then Celebrimbor shows up, and the logistics of how and why simply do not matter here because, as we are about to learn, this is a dream sequence. The seeds she planted at her brother's grave quickly turn into vines that wrap her up. She cooms, and Celebrimbor says,
"Are they not the seeds you planted?"
before he recites the poem, 3 for the Elven Kings, 7 for the Dwarf Lords, 9 for mortal men, but then the vines stab him before he can recite the final lines, 1 ring to rule them all, etc. So here the writers are doing... What is this called? I swear there's a word for this.
This is a literary device called subtext.
Ah, get the fuck out of here, retarded alter... wait, you're not retarded alter ego.
Hello.
Fuck off, both of you. We don't have time for this. Do you have any idea how little I have slept this week? This is indeed subtext, and it is symbolism, and it is delivered with the grace of a fat little boy doing ballet. For you see, Galadriel metaphorically planted the seeds that would become the One Ring, because her actions made Sauron stop deciding to be good, and her actions also allowed the 3 elven rings to be forged. And this is the really clever part of this scene. The seeds that she literally just planted moments ago come alive and start attacking her and Celebrimbor, just as her actions in enabling Sauron will result in their destruction. Which is like a double meaning, because it's all metaphorical and symbolic and shit. And, well, yeah, shit is the right word. This is utter shit. And whoever thought this was clever should be force-fed a load of coins and then strapped to an MRI machine. To be clear, the reason this is terrible is because the seeds themselves mean nothing. Galadriel planted them as she was paying her respects to her brother, and they have absolutely nothing to do with Sauron or the rings or anything else. The writers could have instead had her place a little wooden statue of Finrod at Finrod's grave, and then, oh no, it comes to life, it turns into Sauron and starts stabbing Celebrimbor, and then Celebrimbor ominously says, "Is this not the friend you befriended?" But anyway, we then cut out of this exceptionally clever piece of distilled cinematic excrement to a scene of Gil-galad discussing plans to attack Adar in Mordor, as well as the whereabouts of Sauron. This means that Galadriel has informed Gil-galad of what happened in the latter half of Season 1, including who Adar is, what Adar wants, that there are a lot of orcs, and presumably that she accidentally caused the volcano to go off, despite the fact that she herself doesn't understand why this was her fault. As Galadriel is clearly troubled in this scene, this suggests that whatever just happened in subtext land was either a bad dream or, more likely, a vision. We also get a quick shot of Sauron as Galadriel fingers her ring, which means the show is definitely suggesting that there is a connection between Sauron and the Elven Rings. We don't know this for certain yet, because the writers of Rings of Power absolutely have a habit of hiding information from us before revealing it at what they consider to be the most emotionally effective moment. Anyway, Gil-galad is informed that their spies saw Sauron entering Mordor, and they suspect that he plans to supplant Adar and take over, which would almost certainly make substantially more sense than whatever 7-dimensional backwards chess game he is currently playing. However, there is no apparent reason why they believe that Sauron and Adar are not already working together. The aforementioned spy can't know this because the spy was wrong about why Sauron was in Mordor in the first place, and given who Sauron is, I have no idea why they are assuming that Sauron is there to replace Adar rather than to command him. It's almost like they read the script. The only possible way around this is that Galadriel explained to Gil-galad that Adar claimed not to like Sauron very much, and he then disseminated this information amongst the other commanders, which is possible, but again, Sauron's whole deal is trickery and subterfuge, so I am not sure why he would readily believe this. Then the writers actually explain why Galadriel is present in this scene. If you had forgotten, she is the commander of the northern armies.
And what says the commander of the northern armies? Galadriel.
So Galadriel was indeed, amongst other things, the commander of the northern armies. That she still has this position doesn't really make any sense, because even if we disregard everything that Galadriel did in Season 1 that would give Gil-galad reason to be pissed off with her, as far as Gil-galad was aware, from the end of Episode 1 through to the start of Episode 8, Galadriel was in Valinor. And yet the fact that she is still the commander of the northern armies means that he didn't bother replacing her, nor did he replace her after she brought fucking Sauron back without realizing. Making this another example of the writers twisting reality so that Galadriel avoids the consequences of her own actions. She is still the commander of the northern armies because that's what she was at the start of the series. So why wouldn't she be now? I guess Galadriel is just that fucking good at commanding the northern armies. No one can bark orders quite like this slender 5-foot-tall chihuahua with an air horn. Gil-galad notices that Galadriel is troubled, and she explains that she has a hunch that Sauron will not remain in Mordor. She explains that Sauron does not see himself as master of a barren waste, but as master of all Middle-earth. And this is her explanation for why she believes Sauron will not remain in Mordor. If we do exactly what the writers do not want us to do, and we think about the dialogue they have written, then this means that Galadriel is saying that Sauron is probably not in Mordor, he's probably in Middle-earth. Because he doesn't want to take over Mordor, he wants to take over Middle-earth. As in, he could be fucking anywhere, including Mordor. We know that Sauron is in Eregion, but given what Galadriel just said, this doesn't make any sense because Sauron doesn't want to be the master of Eregion, he wants to be the master of Middle-earth, which are, of course, two different things. He is, of course, in Eregion because it will enable him to become the master of Middle-earth, much like being in Mordor would potentially enable him to become the master of Middle-earth. In other words, this statement sounds clever and profound, but it makes about as much sense as a silencer on a nuclear bomb. Anyway, she continues that she believes Sauron doesn't want to rule purely by conquest, but through both conquest and through bending the minds of the people. And in order to do that, Sauron needs rings.
And for that he needs not armies, but rings.
I am unsure why Galadriel would assume this. The only magical rings we have seen so far in Rings of Power are the 3 elven rings. And whilst these appear to be doing something, they don't currently appear to be bending anyone's minds, at least as far as we are aware. That is, of course, unless the various visions Galadriel is having are as a direct result of Sauron uploading himself into her brain, which would then mean that Galadriel is being influenced by Sauron to talk to Gil-galad, who is also being influenced by Sauron, and they are discussing how to stop Sauron influencing people. I mean, the first thing to do would be to take those fucking rings off, but now that we are in episode 2, we can't be retreading old ground. The show must go on. Essentially what has happened here is that Galadriel has correctly worked out, with a little help from a vision shown to her either by Sauron or by the ring being spooky, that Sauron's intent is to create many rings of power to take over Middle-earth. As Celebrimbor recited in the vision previously, 3 for the Elven Kings, 7 for the Dwarf Lords, 9 for mortal men. This means that if Galadriel is working under the assumption that Sauron's evil plan is to make a bunch of evil rings, then she should also be of the belief that she is currently wearing one of them.
By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
Galadriel continues,
And he cannot craft them without Celebrimbor.
I don't know, I mean, Sauron taught Celebrimbor what an alloy is. He also demonstrated extensive knowledge of metalworking and blacksmithing whilst under the guise of Halbrand. Galadriel demonstrated that she knows very little about the topic because she was confused when Halbrand the blacksmith displayed skill at handling a sword.
Never known a smith's aide who could do that.
Dumb bitch.
And she has no reason to assume that Sauron would need help from anyone to create magical rings. Yes, I know that at the end of Season 1, Celebrimbor created magical rings with help from Sauron, but what we are expected to believe is that Galadriel does not think that these are evil magical rings created by Sauron, because she attempts repeatedly to minimize the effect that Sauron had upon the creation of these rings. Sauron is evidently some hotshot ring piece who may well be more than capable of crafting powerful magical rings on his own. So now the reason Celebrimbor appeared in the vision dream sequence earlier becomes clear. The writers needed to give Galadriel a reason to suspect that Sauron would influence Celebrimbor. The writers evidently forgot that Celebrimbor already showed clear signs of having been influenced by Sauron back in episode 8 of Season 1.
His suggestions were but the key that unlocked the dam. Not of the flesh, but over flesh.
And they could have simply had a flashback to this particular scene so as to indicate that Galadriel is aware that Celebrimbor being manipulated is a risk, and as far as she could possibly be aware, has already happened. The reason why they did not do this is presumably because this would then raise the obvious question as to why Galadriel did not mention this to anyone earlier, and so they decided instead to do an elaborate subtext filled with symbolism with a topping of metaphors, in which Celebrimbor is manipulated by Sauron so as to put Galadriel on the right path. In other words, the writers placed this idea in her head so that she has a reason to say and do what she says and does in this scene. In response, Gil-galad covers his ring, perhaps because he wants to protect it, perhaps because he is being influenced by Sauron and this was an involuntary move, or perhaps he is still not particularly comfortable with wearing it, given that he knows Sauron was involved in its creation. This small moment is something that could be speculated upon and drawn out if the character of Gil-galad was not a pathetic, uninteresting wet sock of a person, and so it is only mildly interesting when it could have been intriguing. He reassures Galadriel that Sauron is alone, and that he does not have any allies or armies, which he can't know, because he knows nothing about Sauron other than that he was in Mordor. He doesn't know that Sauron isn't working with Adar, and for all he knows, Sauron has a load of other Adars elsewhere in Middle-earth waiting for the time to strike. Maybe Gil-galad doesn't believe what he is saying, but he just wants to calm Galadriel down and reassure her that everything is okay. But we have no reason to believe this, because Gil-galad has never been shown to have anything other than a begrudging working relationship with Galadriel, and he is notable for being one of 2 characters that do not like her. Gil-galad then explains how good Eregion's military defenses are, which one would think Galadriel would already know given that she is thousands of years old, and he explains this moments after he says that Sauron has no army. The reason this happens from a script writing standpoint is because something is likely going to happen to Eregion later in this season, and so informing the audience of the geographical layout of the city's surrounding area is a good move in principle. Communicating this by having a character say, totally unjustifiably, Eregion is protected by 2 rivers with miles of 10-foot thick dwarven stone surrounding it, is not. The reason he says this to Galadriel is to convince her that Celebrimbor is safe from Sauron, which also doesn't work, because this only makes sense if they are working under the presumption that Sauron will leverage Celebrimbor through the use of an army. They do not account for Sauron simply knocking on the door to Eregion and asking if he can come in, which, if you recall, is exactly what happened at the end of the previous episode, and neither Gil-galad nor Galadriel have any reason to believe that Sauron would be unable to gain entry to Eregion. Particularly because Galadriel knows from first-hand experience that he is capable of fucking around with people's brains. And so this conversation should absolutely not put Galadriel's mind at ease, nor should Gil-galad think that it will, making this entirely unjustified exposition. Also, if you didn't notice, everyone is referring to the area that until very recently was known as the Southlands by its new name, Mordor. I know that Waldreg's job was to make sure everyone in Mordor knew that it was called Mordor, but I somewhat doubt that this information traveled particularly quickly across Middle-earth, nor do I think that the elves would pay any attention to what Adar wants to call his new home. Gil-galad doesn't punish Galadriel, comforts Galadriel, is unsure how to feel about the ring. Galadriel gets away with everything, has visions of the plot of Rings of Power, believes Sauron has an evil plan to make a load of evil rings whilst wearing one of the aforementioned evil rings. Galadriel then explains to Gil-galad that she has had multiple visions since putting the ring on, glimpses of the unseen world, as she puts it. Naturally, these glimpses occur at specific times and show her specific things that will enable the plot of Season 2 of Rings of Power to unfold. After all, random unexplained visions are a very convenient way for an incompetent writer to propel their story. If you are unsure how to make a character do a thing, just make them have a vision that motivates them to do the thing. You don't need to explain it, visions can happen. They can strike at any time, even when you least expect it. On that point, I skipped over this pretty quickly in part 1 because my brain was hurting. But why does Galadriel get one of these rings? It makes sense for Gil-galad to have one, obviously, and James Corden is the oldest and wisest elf, so that also makes an amount of sense. Galadriel is a disgraced military commander who keeps lying to people and disobeying her king. She is quite literally the mother of all fuck-ups. And so, yes, the ring just kind of accidentally got dropped in her approximate vicinity in the previous episode, so she was like, oh, cool, I'll have that. But since then, Gil-galad has evidently not told her, by the way, I'm obviously not letting you keep that. I'm going to give it to Derek, my loyal masseuse, because he has demonstrated that he can be trusted with an insanely powerful and quite possibly evil magical ring, whereas you have demonstrated that you absolutely cannot. But anyway, the writers need Galadriel to go to Eregion, so they need her to wear the ring so that she can have visions. Got it. Right. Anyway, Gil-galad then reveals that the rings seem to have kindled their ability to see that which has not yet come to pass. Thank you, dopamine gods, I remember that line. This is confusing because at the start of Season 1, Gil-galad explains that he specifically sent Galadriel away because he had foreseen that she would keep alive the very evil she sought to defeat, which of course is precisely what ended up happening, thereby suggesting that Gil-galad can already see the future to some degree. My best guess is that the use of the word kindled here suggests that the rings are making Gil-galad see more visions of the future, and they are making Galadriel start to see visions of the future, period. Gil-galad then says, "Oh good, you're having these wacky visions of random expository bullshit too. I thought I was losing my mind, but if it's happening to you as well, then I guess these rings must be doing something to our heads. Maybe we should take them off." No, wait, I almost forgot. We can't take them off because if we do, the tree will become gooey. Also, we should probably go and check on James Corden, but then again, I have been reliably informed that he is both old and wise, so he's probably okay. Gil-galad then explains that he has seen visions of bad shit happening, and Galadriel begs him to send her to Eregion to make sure Sauron doesn't make any bad shit happen. He refuses, saying that he cannot let her face Sauron again.
Once the deceiver obtains a being's trust, he gains the ability to sculpt their very thoughts, to deceive not only their heart and mind, but their eyes and ears, to alter their very reality.
Which makes this the second time that Season 2 has suggested that Galadriel's actions in Season 1 were at least partially as a result of Sauron fucking with her brain. Which, forgive me for suggesting, very much seems like the writers are frantically trying to clean up their diarrhea and make Galadriel more likable in retrospect. Galadriel's response, however, is that whilst Sauron knows her mind, she knows his.
Which is why I must face him. Why I alone can slay him.
Galadriel, honey, you adorable little lizard, you do not know Sauron's mind. You spent 99% of your time with Sauron unaware that he was Sauron. He played you like a loud, obnoxious, and unrelentingly irritating fiddle. Actually, wait, fiddles are none of those things. He played you like a loud, obnoxious, and unrelentingly irritating vuvuzela. Everything Sauron said and did whilst under the guise of Halbrand was probably a lie to manipulate you. You may not even know what he looks like. Maybe he has a thick Indian accent. You have no idea who this person is. And if you're paying attention, you may be thinking, but random, this isn't out of character for Galadriel. She has spent the entirety of both seasons so far being a shining beacon of pridefulness and arrogance that is bright enough to illuminate a black hole, so surely, if anything, it is in character for Galadriel to believe that she and only she can defeat Sauron. And yes, you are quite correct. The problem is that the show seems to be treating Galadriel as though she has undergone, or is undergoing, some kind of shift in her personality and her behavior as a result of what happened in Season 1. The show thinks she knows, understands, and accepts what she did wrong, and that now it is time for her to move on and right the wrongs of Season 1. It is her responsibility to do so, which is a marked difference from start of Season 1 Galadriel, who didn't seem to understand what the word responsibility means because she was obsessively hunting Sauron for entirely personal reasons. This is clearly what the writers are trying to do. The problem is that they do not understand what Galadriel did wrong, and they have provided terrible half-assed non-explanations whenever they allow Galadriel to justify what she did, and they have since repeatedly suggested that actually it probably wasn't really her fault anyway. It was Sauron fucking with her brain. And they are now trying to tell us that Galadriel should return to Eregion because she must face Sauron because she is the only one who can, thereby demonstrating quite conclusively that she has not changed. She is still the same person that she was before. She is still hunting the same person as she was before. The writers just think that she is doing it for different reasons, and they think she is justified in believing all of the above. Gil-galad, however, maintains that no, you're not going to go and face Sauron alone. Galadriel then senses that the scene is about to end, and remembers that rule number 4 for writing Rings of Power is to dramatically cut away, leaving each scene on a cliffhanger to make the audience forget that the scene didn't make any sense, and she says,
You cannot face him alone.
Supposing I was not alone.
Bam, bam, bam. Oh boy, I can't wait to see what happens next in this show. It's tickling my dopamine receptors in just the right spot. Oh boy, I wonder who she is going to recruit. I can't look away. What else should I say? Please don't hurt my family. It sure is good to be back in Middle-earth. This is even better than the Peter Jackson movies. They don't love me like you do, Amazon. Please tickle my dopamine receptors again. I am addicted to wanting to know what happens next. Alright, Galadriel has learned fucking nothing. Doesn't want Galadriel to fuck everything up again. Cut to Eregion, where Celebrimbor's assistant informs Sauron that Celebrimbor has denied him entry to the city, and they have this conversation whilst inside the city. Sauron, naturally, decides that he will wait at the entrance in case Celebrimbor changes his mind. The assistant returns to Celebrimbor and says, "Oh dear, whatever shall we do? He's refused to leave. If only we had guards that were capable of removing vagabonds, delinquents, and other undesirables from our gates." Celebrimbor then remembers that he needs to adhere to rule number 5 for writing Rings of Power, and he proceeds to say exactly what he is thinking.
I promised Lady Galadriel before she left that I would never treat with him again.
Celebrimbor then says to let Halbrand be, and that he will probably leave soon enough, confirming that the guards of Eregion are more what you would call guidelines than actual guards. Now, at this point I was wondering, where on earth is the messenger from Lindon, as this messenger is, of course, carrying a document informing Celebrimbor that Halbrand is Sauron, but the writers make sure to have Celebrimbor address that too.
Messengers from Lindon should arrive with news any day.
Which I guess means he received a message saying that the real message would be here soon? The arrival of this message is, like many things in Rings of Power, an extremely blunt narrative device that is being employed with the goal of building tension. Will the messenger reach Celebrimbor in time? Or will Sauron's willy be planted firmly in Celebrimbor's cerebellum by the time it arrives? And had the writers done the groundwork needed to establish an approximate time frame for this journey in Season 1, then this gradual build of tension would have had the potential to be both subtle and effective. What we get instead is that Gil-galad explained the contents of the letter to the audience to make sure they understood that the writers were employing this particular narrative device, and then Celebrimbor explained to the audience that the message will be here soon, despite this sentence having absolutely nothing to do with their prior conversation. I can't play all of it because of the YouTube bots, but he and his messenger are discussing what to do with Halbrand, and then he wanders off screen and blurts out,
Messengers from Lindon should arrive with news any day.
Like, okay, cool. And the fact that this line is delivered once Celebrimbor is off screen means it is not unlikely that the writers added this line after the fact with ADR, because they wanted to further emphasize the importance of this letter. And so, the end result is that the narrative device that is the message from Lindon is entirely ineffective, because the writers are forcing it down our throats rather than letting it exist and build in anything approximating a natural manner. We then see that the aforementioned messengers have been attacked and killed, which means, oh no. Who attacked them? Was this blind luck? Please tell me it was blind luck. That will make me laugh so fucking hard. Also, I love how Gil-galad had some pretty earth-shattering news that needed to be delivered to Eregion as soon as possible, and so he sent out 2 dudes.
What the fuck?
Anyway, as the scene ends, we cut to a brief shot of Sauron chilling in Eregion, indicating that he may be behind this attack, which is the only thing that can make sense, but it also wouldn't make any sense whatsoever, but rather than speculate, I will wait until this is explained if it ever in fact is. Okay, Celebrimbor. Let's go with that. So Celebrimbor, I'm not going to remember to call him Celebrimbor for the rest of these videos. Sorry, I'm not going to commit to that. Says things for no reason other than to build tension. Doesn't understand how guards work, which actually makes him the, I think, 4th character who doesn't understand how guards work, because in Season 1 we had King Durin didn't use guards to protect the Mithril Mine, and Miriel didn't use guards to protect her father. There's probably another one, but those are the 2 that come to mind. And then Sauron is patient. He can wait. Cut to Skeletor, who returns to Castle Karas Gare after spying on Nori and not Gandalf. We see a procession of Androgynites doing a thing with some butterflies and some blood, and then Rasputin magics the butterflies and they turn into Feminem. That was not on my bingo card. So before we continue, either Rasputin is capable of just resurrecting people, or this cult of Androgynites use some kind of dark magic to not quite die when they die, and they can come back to life if you bleed on some butterflies. I wonder why he didn't resurrect the other 2. Anyway, Feminem and Rasputin discuss a whole load of bullshit that we already know. Sauron is deceiving his enemies, not Gandalf is traveling with 2 halflings, he won't be vulnerable for long, and they must reach him before he becomes more powerful. So why exactly did Rasputin resurrect Feminem? Well, he asks what she knows about Sauron and not Gandalf, and the answer is that she knows less than he does, and we're not given any reason to believe that she would know more. I'm also guessing, this is me trying my best to make sense of these visuals, that Rasputin resurrected Feminem prior to episode 2, and she was out doing some scouting and stuff, and then this whole thing with the blood and the butterflies was not actually a resurrection, but maybe a teleportation spell or similar. Which is just needlessly confusing and vague, but confusing and vague is unfortunately the only way to make partial sense of this scene. Rasputin then says that Feminem is useless and suggests that he should have spent the blood on more useful servants. And then we hear... Oh wow, another mystery box. I wonder what made that noise. Is it a fell beast? Is it a cave troll? Is it a Balrog?
I hope it's a Balrog. I like it when I see the thing that I know.
Embrace the mystery box, you pathetic fuck. Also, what the hell are you dressed as now?
The craft world sings to me.
I'm not even going to ask. Probably some nerd shit. Anyway, then Skeletor shows up and they have another retarded conversation. Skeletor says that he will capture not Gandalf if Rasputin heals the curse upon their flesh. And he reveals that his master plan is to leverage Nori and Poppy. If not Gandalf refuses to surrender, he will kill the Harfoots. It is remarkably bold of Skeletor to assume that the Androgynites, whom Rasputin just described as his most powerful acolytes, did not attempt this previously. I actually have no idea why they did not attempt this previously. Maybe the writers only just thought of it. Additionally, the fact that these three clowns were the best of the best does not fill me with confidence regarding the state of the rest of his cult. Anyway, before Rasputin can agree to this, the scene cuts away because, obviously, rule number 4, no one ever gets to finish their conversation because we need that jugular shot of artificial drama. This scene pretty much epitomizes much of the writing in Rings of Power. It is expository almost in its entirety. It drops in a couple of mystery boxes to keep the viewer hooked, it explains what Skeletor plans to do, and it injects some tension into the Nori scenes. I'm not saying that tension wasn't needed, because it absolutely was. The only tension in the Nori scenes in the previous episode was when the writers hid information from the audience before revealing that Poppy was following them, and that is a card that they can only play once. Unless, I guess, they do the same with Nori's family in the next episode, which, principally, seems absurd, but if you think about it, they could absolutely show up next episode, and this would be just as reasonable as it was for Poppy to show up in the last episode. Nothing matters, and the characters just go where they are told, which is typically in the direction that will elicit the greatest hit of dopamine for the audience. Okay, Rasputin is in charge of the Androgynites, has some kind of plan involving Sauron and not Gandalf, has incompetent minions. Skeletor has a curse upon his flesh, willing to kill people to heal himself, and Feminem is back again. Now it is time for a Nori and Poppy scene, which means we need to fill some time with meaningless drivel. The Harfoots try to come up with a name for not Gandalf, which makes me question why Nori had not broached this topic until now. The reason, of course, is that 20 minutes into episode 2 of season 2 of Rings of Power, the writers needed to fill time. Not Gandalf then says that no one can give you a name because names are yours already, which might be how it works for a wizard, because they fall from the sky and are not the product of the birds and the bees. But in the case of Nori, she was named Eleanor Brandyfoot by her parents. Her parents gave her that name, which is how names work in literally any and all cases other than in the case of beings, like not Gandalf and Sauron, I guess. So whilst it makes sense for not Gandalf to want to find out his name rather than have Nori pull one out of her hairy ungroomed cat flap, it doesn't make any sense for him to be of the understanding that this naming convention also applies to Harfoots. In the background of this scene, we see Poppy looking at the map and trying to work out where they need to go, which reminds me, Malva is currently in charge of the Harfoots because she is always right, even though she can't read, nor does she know how maps work. And in the finale of season 1, Poppy corrects Malva in her use of the map, which potentially indicated that Poppy was going to stay and help out. As Poppy did not stay and help out, this means it is not unlikely that the Harfoots are at this very moment confidently marching into Mordor, whilst chanting about how no one goes off trail. Later that day, Nori tried to forage for food, but was unable to find anything worth eating, only finding a scorpion and a cactus. This actually makes a bit of sense, as she was shown to do this way back in episode 1 of season 1, when she was bravely not following the rules. She tells not Gandalf that the scorpion stung her, she fell over, and this is how she found the cactus. A sequence of events that also requires that Nori is curious and clumsy, and I'll be fucking damned if she is not consistently written. They then hear something and proceed to hide, and this is the one part of season 2 so far that actually made me smile. Not Gandalf grabs his stuff, turns around, and Nori and Poppy have already hidden so effectively that he has no idea where they are. This makes perfect sense because hiding is what Harfoots are good at, so they would instinctively do this very quickly. Unfortunately, however, the way this scene is framed makes it appear that they have just kind of abandoned him to work out his own hiding spot, which is certainly a bit of a dick move, and it would have been slightly more coherent if the Harfoots poked their heads out, "Hey, don't worry about us, we're here, go and hide behind that rock." We then get some characteristically clunky dialogue that adheres to multiple rules for writing Rings of Power simultaneously. After Skeletor and his Mad Max buddies leave, Not Gandalf says that Skeletor was watching their trail, and so they should find another. This is really fucking dumb, because surely the natural assumption would be that Skeletor is tracking them, and will therefore follow them wherever they go, not that Skeletor just kind of had his eye on the direction they were traveling. Then Nori says that they have already found another trail, and the camera pans up to a wide open stretch of desert.
Oh yeah, it's all coming together.
This is retarded, because if you are being tracked, followed, spied upon, or any combination of the above, walking around in a gigantic, flat, sparse stretch of desert is just about the dumbest thing you can do, because all Skeletor has to do is turn around and hey, wait a minute, there they are! Crossing this part of the desert was observed and acknowledged as an option earlier in the episode, but I didn't bother mentioning it because I assumed that the writers were wasting my time. Again. However, now that the party has decided to take that more dangerous path, it means that this earlier scene functioned as another clunky as fuck means by which to establish tension.
My preference would be to avoid the path in which we would run out of water the first day and die of heat the second.
There isn't much water, and it is very hot. Well fucking done. I couldn't possibly have worked that out for myself. It's not like it's a desert or anything. But then that said, the target audience for Rings of Power is children who don't have eyes or any understanding of storytelling, so I guess that explains the incessant need to overtly spell everything out. But given the overall context of this particular plotline, the prior scene where they say, hey, shall we go this way? No, there's no water and it's hot. Oh, okay, let's not go that way, could have been skipped over entirely, because it is more than sufficient to have Nori say, we've already found our alternate path, and then for the camera to pan up and show the desert as it does in this scene. Most people have a baseline understanding of what a desert is, which means you do not need to dedicate multiple lines of dialogue explaining that deserts can be dangerous. Unless, of course, your goal is to fill time in a TV show. The group then collectively says,
nobody goes off trail. Nobody walks alone.
But this time, they are saying it ironically, because they are in the process of going off trail. This would be fine, if not for the fact that multiple times in Season 1, the Harfoots would chant that nobody goes off trail whilst people went off trail, and they would chant that nobody walks alone whilst leaving people behind, which indicates that neither the writers nor the characters understand what these words actually mean, which means trying to play this as ironic falls completely flat. Okay, Gandalf knows how deserts work. Skeletor is really good at tracking. Skeletor is terrible at tracking. And Nori is curious and clumsy. We then return to Khazad-Dum, and the dwarves tell the audience that the gardens have withered since the earthquake, which means the writers have decided to have the characters exposit information that they already know to the audience that the audience also already knows because we can fucking see that the gardens have withered. The dwarf ladies then discuss rumors that the dwarves are cursed, and that this curse began when Prince Durin let an elf into their home. This is, frankly, embarrassing. A point of criticism of Season 1 was that the broader political relationship between the elves and the dwarves was not explored at all. King Durin doesn't like elves and he doesn't trust elves, but we have absolutely no idea why. The reason, more than likely, is because the elf and the dwarf in the other thing didn't like each other, and that is just quintessentially Lord of the Ringsy, so it was copied and pasted into Amazon's Middle-earth, hence why King Durin doesn't like elves. This line, that rumors are spreading of a curse brought on by the presence of an elf, indicates that a dislike of elves is not uncommon amongst the dwarves of Khazad-Dum, as they are superstitious and they believe that the gods have cursed them for being friendly with an elf. This also raises the question as to why Durin ever had any kind of friendship with Elrond if the dwarves and the elves disliking each other is just kind of the way things are. I'm not saying this couldn't happen, but we have not had so much as a hint that their friendship was going against any kind of cultural norms. This is a tiny line that has rather large implications that I don't think the writers thought through whatsoever. Speaking of the writers not thinking anything through, Disa then tells these two dwarves to stop gossiping, because ogres are like wait, no, that's a good metaphor. Rumors are like songbirds. They sound filling from afar, but up close they are an empty feast. Which may be a case of the writers crying for help and trying to send me a message in code that they are fully aware that the show they have written might look flashy and substantive, but once you examine it, you find that it is empty, devoid of life. Lacking in nutrition, the visual equivalent of junk food, structured so as to string the dopamine addicts along scene by scene until they reach the end of the season and find themselves dribbling on the floor in anticipation of the next product to consume. Where was I? Oh yeah, Disa reassures these other dwarf ladies that they are about to prove that nothing bad is happening, and they are granted an audience with the king. King Durin would like to know what caused the earthquake at the start of the episode. Was someone disobediently doing some digging in the dangerous mithril mine? Was the Balrog having a wank? Or was Kemen clapping Aarian's cheeks? Turns out, none of the above. Navi, the Delve Master, explains to the king that a fire mountain awoke and the eruption spread throughout Middle-earth, and they are feeling the effects of the eruption here. My bullshit detector is tingling ever so slightly, but I am not a volcano explosionologist, I am a retard with a computer, so I'll just handwave this and say that the eruption was so powerful that it sent evil shockwaves across Middle-earth. And Navi knows that these shockwaves came from Mount Doom because I guess he would know that Mount Doom is the closest volcano. He then clarifies that the effects of the eruption that occurred in episode 6 of season 1 were felt at the start of this episode 2 of season 2, which means that this Khazad-Dum plot is not synchronized with either the Southlands plot, the Harfoots plot, or the Galadriel plot. Whether this is a problem, I will have to wait until I do my final autopsy of season 2 to properly work out, so for now, I will just clarify that the show has told us that the Khazad-Dum scenes in episode 7 were taking place prior to the events of episode 6. Navi then tells King Durin that they need to repair the shafts to fix the mirrors so that they can grow the crops again. But Disa says that every stone singer has failed to find a safe path to dig. She then asks the king for his approval to let them find the light. I don't have a clue what this means. It can't be referring to digging to the surface because they already had permission to do this in order to fix the mirrors, but no time for that now. The dwarf lady starts singing, and this causes further tremors. Torches are snuffed out, and there is a cave-in. Before I address the nature of this ability, they just did something incredibly dangerous without any kind of precautions, and so we just have to assume that no dwarves were near this cave-in, but either way, King Durin was characterized in Season 1 as being overly cautious.
We do not dig in earth that cannot support it, tempting shadow, rock, and mine to bury us all beneath the mountain. I will not risk dwarven lives.
You expect me to swat his hand away because you're afraid of a bloody rockfall?
And so it is very strange to see him say, "Okay, ladies, go ahead and poke a hole in our ceiling with your voices." In Season 1, I skipped past this stone singing thing because it was very brief and it didn't appear to do much, and so it was unclear and irrelevant whether it was a case of the dwarves using their voices to harmonize and reverberate the rocks at specific frequencies to find hidden caves, or if they are using some kind of magical ability to commune with the rocks and ask them where to go. However, what just happened is not that. They just used their voices and accidentally caused a cave-in. Yes, I'm sure if you are in a very small and precarious cave and you bring a subwoofer with you and start playing Carpenter Brut, then things will not end well. But Khazad-Dum is a gigantic, and we have to assume relatively structurally sound cavern, and so the fact that these three ladies can let rip and seemingly target one particular part of this cave that is nowhere near them with their voices is magic. There is no other explanation for this. And just so we're clear, I'm highlighting this as something that is, not as something that is a problem. I don't care if this is different to what Tolkien wrote, I care if Rings of Power is following its own rules, and in this regard it seems to be. As for whether this will continue going forward, time will tell. Additionally, from this point on, we need to remember that if Disa ever needs to kill anyone, all she needs to do is sing at the resonant frequency of that person's face. The king then says that because the stone singers are kinda broken right about now, the dwarves need to dig carefully, for they will be digging in the dark. He asks Disa to stay for a moment and says,
"Are you really going to make me ask?"
Little moments like this remind me of why, once upon a time, back before episode 7 of season 1, King Durin was the best character in the show. The actor is excellent, and for some reason, the writers are generally more competent at writing dialogue for him than for most of the other characters. This line, and its delivery, indicate that King Durin deeply regrets how things went down when he last saw his son. He is a very proud individual, but he also still cares about his son's well-being. He is also intuitive enough to figure that Disa wants them to not be estranged. The following conversation entails Disa pretending to misunderstand because she wants the king to actually have the balls to ask what he wants to ask, the king giving something approximating an apology.
Surely Durin knows I spoke in anger.
And after Disa suggests that he say this to Durin instead of her, the king angrily asks why he should be the one to apologize to Durin and not the other way around. This is all totally natural and understandable dialogue that is entirely coherent with everything that has come before. And it leads Disa to conclude that both Durins are as stubborn as each other. Then the writers actually managed to turn this conversation in a different direction in a coherent manner, whereas when they usually do this, it feels like being backhanded by a 747. One example of this was back in episode 6 of season 1, where Galadriel said to Isildur,
"I can see the land, you'll be able to see it soon as well."
And Isildur replies,
"Oh wow, your eyes are really good."
And Galadriel responds,
"Yes, they are, but they have never seen you before."
Which is not how people talk, and the quality of Galadriel's vision has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that she and Isildur had never crossed paths prior to this moment. Conversely, in this scene in Season 2, the king says that he considers his stubbornness to be strength, and Disa replies that it must take great strength to carry a grudge like this. She highlights that the strength King Durin claims to have is the direct cause of his estrangement from his own son, and thereby draws a link between stubbornness, strength, and the failing relationship between the Durins. This isn't anything particularly groundbreaking, but I dare say this is actually quite good. Disa then blames the king for her inability to hear the mountain, because the king is deaf to the sorrow of his own son, which is, again, symbolic of the fact that the dwarves of Khazad-Dum are falling into darkness, literally and metaphorically, and this is at least partially because of the king's stubborn attitude. This is a little blunt, but it is nowhere near as blunt as the previous symbolism involving the seeds, because unlike that utter dreck, all of the pieces required to construct this moment of symbolism do actually serve two purposes. These two pieces fit together, whereas in the earlier scene, there was only one piece, and the writers hastily scribbled a new one next to it so that they could pretend as though they had made something clever. Disa then directly appeals to the king's value, strength, and tells him that if he wants to display how strong he is, he will summon his son. This is surprisingly multi-layered dialogue. On surface level, Disa is saying, "Hello, king, you want to be strong? Well, do the thing and you'll be strong." But the subtext here is that Disa wants the king to think that she thinks he is stronger than Durin. Disa essentially tells him there's no way Durin will ever be strong enough to reach out, but you are stronger than your son, so why don't you demonstrate that? Well done, writers. I don't take back all of the mean things I've said about you so far, but I will add something nice to the pile. This dialogue exchange is excellent. Disa appeals to what the king wants. The king justifies his position whilst Disa pokes holes in it, and on its most basic level, the characters are actually responding to what the other one is saying. This scene employs symbolism in a way that does not feel ham-fisted or incompetent. The lines themselves, for the most part, feel like something someone might actually say. And although the scene does end with an unanswered question before cutting away, this serves as an example of how to do this competently. The king has been challenged, and now he needs to decide what he will do, and so the hook for his next scene is, will he summon Durin? This is not cheap, manipulative, nor is it contrived. This is a natural resolution to their conversation, despite the fact that it ends in an unanswered question. I don't know if the writers went home and had their wives, husband, and or lovers check their script for this scene, but whoever is responsible for this either lucked out massively, or they actually appear to know what they are doing. My only question is, why is Disa doing this, beyond the fact that she loves her husband and doesn't want him to be upset? This is probably the best scene in the entirety of Rings of Power so far, and if this leads somewhere, it certainly has potential. If it goes nowhere, then this is an excellent waste of time. Disa, the best character in the show. Intelligent and able to appeal to the desires of others, and her voice is a deadly weapon. And King Durin still cares about his son, considers his grudge with Durin to be a burden. We then see that Durin is working in the mines alongside some commoners, and they take the piss out of him for having palace hands.
Oh, here we go. Growing blisters, I see. No shame in it. Even I've had them. When I was 5.
I get what the writers are trying to do here, but this does not work. Durin has been shown to be a very hands-on dwarf.
We're making good progress in the old mine.
There's 4 dwarfs down there!
I just pulled out the last one.
And you would be forgiven for forgetting that he is actually the Prince of Khazad-Dum. However, he is currently in a bad place emotionally because of all the stuff with his dad, and so the writers need him to be pushed even lower for maximum drama. And so they decide that, actually, Durin has cute little baby hands that are not used to hard labor. The workers continue that it is both Durin's and his father's fault that they are in this mess, as in, the workers believe that the Durins are collectively responsible for the cave-in that destroyed all their crops. The only reason why they would believe this is if they have fallen prey to the aforementioned gossip involving Durin being responsible for their bad fortunes due to his friendship with Elrond, but that is not mentioned in this scene. The dwarves mock Durin for having soft, delicate hands that are more suited to polishing jewelry than mining, but we have no reason to believe that Durin is any less experienced as a miner than anyone else. If these dwarves are pissed off with Elrond because they blame them for making everything go tits up, then would it not have made more sense, and been more emotionally impactful, for the dwarves to mock and belittle Elrond, and maybe suggest that Durin is as weak as his elven friends? Anyway, Durin does not fight back, and he comes home from school after having been bullied relentlessly, and we are treated to another scene of Disa being the best character in this show. She appeals to Durin's values to try and get him to apologize to his father. The way she does this is by serving last year's bread to Durin, thereby prompting him to ask, "What the fuck, woman?" At which point she says that she would love to go and get fresh grain from the surface, but someone, wink wink nudge nudge, will need to convince the king to let them do that. Before I continue, although Disa is great in this scene, the information that she is leveraging here makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, because it relies upon King Durin being unwilling to allow his people to trade with the surface for food, whilst knowing that his people have lost the ability to grow their own. Maybe we are expected to believe that King Durin is a crazy person who is so stubborn that he would rather his people starve than ask for help, but if this is the case, it would have been nice to maybe show that the dwarves of Khazad-Dum are aware of how insane the king is. Maybe the explanation is that the dwarves are currently trapped underground, and the tunnel connecting Khazad-Dum to the surface was damaged, but if this was the case, it wouldn't make any sense for Disa to say,
"Why not trade for fresh grain from the surface?"
Splendid idea. But who in the Dimbrel Dale will we find to convince your father of it?
Additionally, the fact that Disa says this means that they do have a tunnel to the surface, which means they could set up their mirrors in this tunnel as a temporary measure so that they don't have to resort to eating their children, and they can slow down on trying to make new tunnels and stop accidentally causing cave-ins. Durin then partially figures out what his wife is doing, and she tells him straight up,
"Apologize."
The writers then highlight another reason why Durin is pissed off with his father, because not only did he banish Elrond from Khazad-Dum, but he also declined Elrond's trade deal, which would have led to 500 years worth of food, and food is currently what he is unsatisfied with. Disa is then pissed off at Durin's focus on food, and she tells him that she is afraid of what is happening because she can't hear the mountains anymore. And she presumably believes that getting Durin and his father back on speaking terms will help, if not because it will heal the dwarves, and this healing may extend to their home, then because she believes the dwarves will better be able to deal with their current predicament if their king and his son are not estranged. This mostly works. The problem is that food is a more immediate concern than whether or not you can hear the mountains. If you have nothing to eat, then your ability to dig tunnels safely is not relevant. Durin and Disa are excellent here, but there are rather large question marks relating to the scene itself, such as how is year-old bread still edible? Why would King Durin have a problem with his people trading for fresh food when they are currently unable to grow their own? And why is Durin struggling so much to afford decent food given that until quite recently he was a prince? Unless we are expected to believe that their struggles are representative of the struggles shared by all of the dwarves, which is not really depicted elsewhere. Has cute little baby hands, doesn't fight back when bullied, although if I had to guess, I would say that he almost certainly will, because this conflict is probably going to escalate further during this season. And Disa is scared because she can't hear the mountain, thinks hearing the mountain is more important than food. This is the only real question mark that I have on Disa so far, but I'm not going to dwell on it because I want to see how the writers develop it. Meanwhile, Elrond is helping James Corden make boats because honestly, why the fuck would there be any consequences for the shit that he pulled in episode 1? Not only has he not received any kind of punishment from the High King, but he is seemingly voluntarily working for the guy who did the exact opposite of what Elrond wanted him to do. Elrond should be more than a little pissed off with James Corden, Galadriel, and Gil-galad, but his actions say otherwise. Anyway, Galadriel has sought him out because, naturally, whenever Elrond is feeling a little glum, he seeks out someone older and wiser than himself, hence how Galadriel knew where he was. Galadriel tells him,
Our letters to Celebrimbor have all gone unanswered.
Which indicates that at least a couple of weeks have passed since the events of episode 1. This lack of a response from Celebrimbor, plus the spooky visions, have convinced Galadriel that Sauron is in Eregion.
The High King has consented to send me and a small party there. I am asking you to join us.
Elrond refuses because he is just a politician, and Galadriel says that because he is a politician, he has Gil-galad's trust. This... Where do I even begin? Politicians are not typically known for being trustworthy. Gil-galad has no reason to place any particular degree of trust in Elrond given what he did a couple of weeks prior. There is also no reason why Galadriel would expect that Elrond would believe that she specifically wants him to come with her. Yes, it may be beneficial for Celebrimbor to see a friendly face instead of this, but if, as she suspects, Sauron is already in Eregion, then a friendly and trustworthy politician would not be my first choice of companions. But anyway, Elrond has refused, so whatever will happen next.
He refuses to send me without you.
And why is that?
You know the reason.
I'm asking if you know it.
The High King believes that if I were to face the enemy alone, I may be vulnerable to deception.
Liar!
This does make some amount of sense from Gil-galad's perspective, but, once again, and I have no idea if the writers meant to do this, Galadriel has concealed information from Elrond, has tried to misdirect him through compliments, and has attempted to manipulate her friend to get what she wants. Oh good lord, where have we seen this before? This is exactly what happened at the end of season 1. And because neither the writers nor Galadriel herself understand what she did wrong, she is doing the exact same fucking thing again. And this is, of course, not acknowledged by Elrond. His response should be, fuck you, Galadriel, I see what you are doing, you are trying to manipulate me to get what you want, you are trying and failing to conceal your true intentions, and you have very obviously learned nothing. Also, the writers evidently didn't realize the irony of having Galadriel say, if I face Sauron alone, I may be vulnerable to deception, moments after she attempted to deceive Elrond. Anyway, Elrond points out that Galadriel has a habit of defying Gil-galad and asks why she doesn't do so again, which uncovers another of Galadriel's little fibs. She previously said, the High King fears I may be vulnerable to deception, when what she actually meant to say was, I am vulnerable to deception.
I may be vulnerable to deception.
And why would he think that? You've defied the High King's orders before, why not do so now?
Because he is right.
In other words, she is repeatedly, and seemingly accidentally, attempting to deceive Elrond, and yes, this is probably because she feels embarrassed, but the fact remains. Elrond appears to be aware of the fact that Galadriel is not being entirely truthful, but he does not make the connection that this exact behavior is precisely what caused their current predicament, and thereby put all of Middle-earth at risk. Then we get what is probably the funniest in a long line of hilariously misguided metaphors that the show has become infamous for.
I was played like a harp to a melody not of my choosing.
I can't watch anymore.
The writers are trying so hard to be clever that this is just pitiful. She could have instead said, Sauron steered me like one of James Corden's boats, but the direction he steered me was not a direction where I wanted to go. Sauron hammered my brain like the dwarves of Khazad-Dum, but instead of hammering me in the direction of good, he hammered me for it was bad. Sauron clothed me in a mantle of deceit, and wrong became right, and I was baptized in a monsoon of anguish. Wait a minute, I swear that last one is from Rebel Moon. Anyway, this is just an embarrassing approximation of what is meant to be articulate, colourful, beautiful, and dare I say Tolkienian dialogue. And because the writers think this is clever, they continue this metaphor with Elrond's response.
Sauron looked inside you, plucked the very song of your soul, note by note, making himself out to be exactly what you needed, the lost king who could ride you to victory. You gave him everything he wanted and then thanked him for it. And now he has done the same to Gil-galad, and to every elf in Lindon.
Elrond concludes that, As the elves have decided to use the rings, Sauron has also deceived them, and they have played directly into his hands. One might expect that Galadriel's response to this revelation might be, "Oh shit, yeah, you're right," before taking the ring off. But instead she says,
And that is why we need you. Help us navigate this labyrinth.
This means that Galadriel is aware that she is susceptible to deception, and she is apparently aware that she is wearing the ring that Sauron wants her to be wearing, and that she is therefore in the process of being deceived, and her solution to the problem is to ask Elrond to help her. There is nothing she can do. She bears no responsibility. She just created the mother of all problems, and she is powerless to put it right. Take the fucking ring off. In this scene, Elrond explains his understanding of how good of a manipulator Sauron is. He explains that Sauron made himself look like Halbrand because he knew that this was Galadriel's type, and he took the little baggie of goodness because he knew that he could use this in future to trick Galadriel into thinking he was the king of the Southlands, which would ultimately lead him to Eregion, allowing him to reveal his identity for no reason, leave Eregion and then come back, and then start manipulating Celebrimbor. I think it is acceptable for Elrond to think that this is what Sauron did and why, but this makes me wonder when exactly Sauron became aware of who Galadriel was and came up with his whole plan. We know that at some point in the past, Sauron killed Finrod before Galadriel swore an oath of vengeance and began hunting him to the ends of the earth. It is probably, therefore, fair to assume that Sauron was aware of who Galadriel was when he turned into a spaghetti monster and then turned into Halbrand. Wait, actually, hold on. If Sauron turned into a spaghetti monster and then teleported to the Southlands, met John Goodman, ended up on the raft, and then bumped into Galadriel, and this chain of causation was unbroken and there was no time in the middle where he could have potentially gone off and done other things, then this means that all of the Finrod stuff must have happened prior to the flashback at the start of Season 2, which means Galadriel was already well into hunting him by that point. Which then indicates that the reason why he chose this form is because he knew that he would be able to trick Galadriel with it, because I guess he knew that Galadriel has a thing for handsome, rugged, 30-something-year-old men. Additionally, if Elrond's assertions are correct, then this means that the entire reason why Sauron took the bag of good from John Goodman is because he realized he can use it to convince Galadriel that he is the king of the Southlands, or at the very least to convince her that he is from the Southlands. I have no idea yet if this is what the writers want us to think, or if this is just Elrond stabbing in the dark, but for the moment, the story seems to be suggesting that when Sauron accidentally crossed paths with Galadriel way back in episode 2 of Season 1, he was already partway through some kind of master plan to take over the world, which then, as I explained in Part 8, makes his future actions in Numenor and in the Southlands completely incoherent. Anyway, Elrond repeatedly explains to Galadriel and the audience how powerful Sauron is. This is entirely justified because Galadriel is a fucking idiot. Elrond fears that everything Galadriel has done, and everything Galadriel is currently trying to do, is a part of Sauron's plan. And he explains,
In choosing to wear those rings, you have all chosen to become his collaborators.
This indicates that he believes the fact that Galadriel is currently wearing Sauron's ring means that she cannot ever defeat Sauron, as she is already dancing to his tune, or, I guess, allowing herself to be strummed like a harp, or whatever that metaphor was. This means that the show is acknowledging what is, or at least should be, painfully obvious to everyone watching it. Wearing these rings is the worst thing you could possibly do. The reason why they are wearing the rings is because if they don't, they will have to leave Middle-earth, which the writers clearly think is a coherent enough explanation for why they would do so. But the whole tree of symbolism thing is so poorly explained that it is almost impossible to understand the stakes or the implications of wearing versus not wearing the rings. Since wearing the rings, both she and Gil-galad have started to have visions, and the obvious assumption here is, okay, well, Sauron is clearly fucking with my brain, but no character experiencing these visions ever suspects this. The only character who seems to be aware that something screwy is going on is Elrond, who clearly believes that the rings cannot be trusted. At the end of the season, I am going to be revisiting my tier list from Season 1, and I have no idea what I'm going to do with Elrond, because so far, he is the only character vocalizing what I am thinking when I am watching the show. Take the fucking ring off. Anyway, Elrond refuses to have any part in this due to the fact that Galadriel is wearing the ring, and so Galadriel then attempts to guilt-trip Elrond into helping her by reminding him of his promise to her in Season 1.
You promised me once that if but a whisper of a rumour of what I feared proved true, you would not rest until it was put right.
For you see, It is not she that is doing anything wrong by wearing the weapon of the enemy and playing directly into his hands. It is Elrond who is at fault. He promised to help her should Sauron ever return. Now, because I've spent quite a long time analysing this abortion, I dare say that I am more familiar with Season 1 than the writers are. Elrond's promise was specifically that he would not rest until the threat is dealt with. He made this promise with the understanding that Galadriel would go to Valinor, which she obviously did not do. He made this promise so that Galadriel would put up her sword and cease her eternal quest for vengeance. He made this promise to reassure her that if she is right, he will ensure that Sauron is defeated in her absence. Now, jumping back to Season 2, Galadriel has just thrown this promise back in his face. The reason why this is fucking pitiful writing that does not accomplish what the writers want it to accomplish is because Elrond's actions in this scene, his repeated urging that Galadriel take the ring off, and his multiple warnings that the elves are playing directly into Sauron's hands, is him keeping his promise. Additionally, if everyone does what Elrond says and the elves are forced to leave Middle-earth and Sauron takes over as a result, then this will be Galadriel's fault, not his. In summary, Galadriel has said, "Come on bro, you promised you'd help me," and Elrond's response should have been, "Bitch, I'm helping right now, take that fucking thing off. I don't care how delicately it plucks your bean while you sleep." Now the outcome of this scene is that Galadriel's manipulation and guilt-tripping fails to convince Elrond to come with her. His characterization is, surprisingly, solid and consistent, as none of what Galadriel said should have actually convinced him. The problem is that the writers do not allow him to go far enough in his admonishment of Galadriel's behavior, which is again brought on by the fact that the writers do not understand the story that they are telling. Okay, Elrond has very strong convictions, does not notice that Galadriel is pulling the exact same shit that started all of this, and Galadriel throws Elrond's promise back at him, lies repeatedly, doesn't know what she did wrong, and is a manipulative bitch. Next up, James Corden is shaving with a shell, which is not something I ever thought I'd see an elf in Middle-earth do, but okay. Not only do elves age, but they also grow beards and need to shave. As we have been told about 14 fucking times, Elrond and Galadriel are the best of friends, so naturally, Elrond does still want to help her, despite the fact that he cannot trust the rings. This is not a particularly strong setup in terms of communication, but it is a functional foundation for challenging Elrond's values. He will have to compromise on one or both of these values, which is typically where all the juicy character drama would usually be located. For this reason, Elrond has sought out the native old wise men for advice. And again, James Corden may be both old and wise, but Elrond believes that there is a strong probability that he is currently being influenced by Sauron. But, you know, the writers told us twice how old and wise he is, so he's just, we've got a scene to do. You can't keep going back to everything that happened before. Elrond challenges James Corden by saying that he cannot trust the rings, and James Corden then asks,
"Would you cast Romil's verses into the flame because the poet was a drunkard?"
The point he is making here is that of separating the art from the artist, which in the example he gave is a fair question. It would not make sense to dispense of any art or wisdom purely because the person who created it was a drunkard. In the case of someone like Michael Jackson, there is a discussion to be had. In the case of Sauron, however, there is no discussion to be had. He is pure fucking evil. He is the master manipulator. He wants to rule Middle-earth. Elrond knows this. Given that James Corden is both old and wise, he should also know this, but evil ring, I guess. The character of James Corden is immediately characterized as wise, and he is then exploited by the writers so that the audience will accept everything that he says and does as wise, which then allows them to tell their tale of batshit insanity without the audience asking inconvenient questions. He continues that Elrond should judge the work and leave judgment concerning those who wrought it to the judge who sees all things. Translation: stop worrying about Sauron, these rings are really cool.
We do not yet fully understand these rings.
Fuck you! Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the problem, but anyway, the writers have made Elrond revert back to Season 1 retarded Elrond, so he of course does not question these wise words from the man of wise. James Corden then concludes by saying that Elrond should not be blind to the ways the rings can be used for good, and that they must remain with the elves, as in the hands of Sauron, they could dominate the minds of all. What James Corden says in this scene is not particularly compelling, and it should be even less compelling to Elrond, who, need I remind you, believes that Sauron probably has James Corden's testicles in a jar on the mantelpiece alongside Galadriel's. The purpose of this scene is to change Elrond's mind about the rings so that the plot can happen, and rather than dance around the many questions that could be asked here, I want to focus on two very specific questions. The first relates to James Corden. He acknowledged in episode 1 that the rings were made without Sauron's touch, which Elrond then countered by saying that Sauron is cunning, and that the rings may well be some kind of trick.
A device in some larger plan, the end of which we cannot yet see.
He then agrees to destroy the rings, even though this will mean abandoning Middle-earth, and the reason he agrees to this is because he is seemingly impressed by Elrond's conviction.
What would you ask of me?
The rings must be destroyed.
You do your father proud.
So, what changed? Well, after trying the ring on for reasons that are entirely unexplained other than by saying, well, he was drawn to its power via Sauron's corruption, maybe, he realized that actually the ring is pretty cool, it is powerful, and it is seemingly not evil. All of which leans heavily on James Corden being old and wise, as he presents it as fact that Sauron does not have any control over him. Because we don't really know anything about James Corden, because we don't know if the rings are indeed having an effect on their bearers, and because we have no idea what the deal with that wave was, I can't provide any kind of coherent explanation as to why he has changed his mind. And the second question is that Elrond literally told James Corden in episode 1 that he is willing to allow the age of the elves to end if the alternative is to fall prey to the designs of the enemy. So, what changed? Well, the information provided to Elrond was provided to him by an elf who is currently wearing one of the rings that Elrond does not trust. It could perhaps have been quite effective to see James Corden casually take the ring off to demonstrate that it is not corrupting him, but that would require care and consideration for what each character believes to be true. Elrond was also told that just because Sauron is evil, it doesn't necessarily mean that the rings are, which, yeah, logically speaking that might be true, but Elrond's issue is that he is unwilling to take that risk. So, in summary, this conversation with James Corden should not have changed Elrond's mind about jack fucking shit. But of course, this conversation is singularly responsible for Elrond's change of heart. You were doing so well, buddy, back into the dumpster you go. Okay, James Corden is willing to take risks, doesn't think it matters in the slightest that Sauron helped to make the rings, and changed his mind for no reason, and Elrond is easily convinced to compromise on his values. Cut back to Arrakis, where everyone's favourite characters are stealthily sneaking around in the open plains of nothingness. Not Gandalf collapses from exhaustion right next to a well because the writers are so good at avoiding consequences that they actively establish solutions to the problems they create in real time. Unfortunately, there is a bell on the well and the rope goes and then the bell rings, which neither of the Harfoots make a point of stopping. Not Gandalf then finds a stick and says it looks similar to the one he saw in his dream. Skeletor was evidently extremely close by, given that he shows up almost immediately, which means that Skeletor was also in this wide open stretch of desert, and yet seemingly would not have found them if not for the bell. Before we get to our obligatory action scene, I'll just remind you here that Skeletor's objective is to capture not Gandalf, and his plan was apparently to threaten to kill the Harfoots to get him to surrender. So, naturally, their opening move is to start firing arrows at the stationary unarmored targets and to miss every shot. Virtually nothing has happened in this plotline in episode 1, but one of the only things that was established was that not Gandalf is reluctant to use magic without a staff because he doesn't want to lose control and risk hurting either himself or anyone else. So, naturally, he gets his staff and immediately summons a tornado. As Nori and Poppy are about to get sucked into the vortex, they remember that they are characters in a TV show and they inform the audience that not Gandalf is unable to stop the tornado moments before they are sucked into the air.
I have contained my rage for as long as possible, but I shall unleash my fury upon you like the crashing of 1,000 waves!
This scene is in the running for the worst in the entire series, because every single piece is contrived as hell. It very much seems as though the writers were like,
"Hello, Bellend, are you ready to write the next masterful scene for our hit TV show?"
"Hello, Twat-Sticks. Yes, I certainly am. Nori and her friends are in the desert, but we can't end the episode just yet. We need to come up with something for them to do."
"Oh, I know. Deserts are hot and they don't have water. My mummy told me that. So let's make not Gandalf collapse from dehydration."
"Wow, what a groundbreaking idea, you nipple trumpet. But wait, if he collapses in the middle of the desert, however will the Harfoots be able to rescue him?"
"Well, let's just make there can be a way well a few meters from where they are.
Oh, you are so clever. Yes, let's do that. That fixes the problem we just created. But seeing as how we are 45 minutes into the episode, do you think maybe something should actually happen?
Whatever do you mean, you colossal titbean? We have the well. That counts as something happening.
No. I mean like something big and spectacular to really convince people that we aren't wasting their time.
Ooh, I know. How about we make there be a bell on the well to alert the people tracking them to their location?
Oh, you are so clever, you shit gargler, because the trackers wouldn't have ever found them in the desert because we threw in that line earlier about how flat open deserts are a really good place to hide.
Yes, but wait, we can't let them capture Not Gandalf because we have to stretch this story out across an entire season. So how can he defend himself?
Well, I know, let's make there be a stick on the ground next to the well, and let's put in a vague reference to a dream about him finding a stick in the previous episode.
Genius! That will make everyone think that we really thought things through before spending $1 billion of someone else's money.
I know, and if we make him do a tornado, then this will also let us finish their story with a cliffhanger.
Yes! JJ would be so proud of us.
Okay, Gandalf can summon tornadoes but can't control them. Skeletor is totally useless. And Nori dumps exposition when she is in the process of dying. Cut to Eregion, where Celebrimbor is doing forge stuff with his assistant. He has made something he calls Ithildin, and he has made it from the last piece of mithril left over from when he crafted the rings.
Out of the moonlight, it is all but invisible.
Yeah, so this is moon runes from The Hobbit. Unlike most things in Rings of Power, this actually doesn't pay off 5 minutes after it is set up, so whether this is going to pay off later, or if this is just member berries to fill time, we will have to wait and see. They then discuss Halbrand, who has evidently been waiting at the gate for days, and the guards have still not tried to get rid of him. Maybe he's been chatting them up, distracting them with alcohol or magic tricks. Oh yeah, this is totally normal behavior. Nothing to be suspicious of whatsoever. Not only has the dude refused to leave, but he has also decided to stand fucking 3 feet from the guards, totally motionless, whilst staring unblinkingly at the forge for what we have to assume is days at the very least. Unless Celebrimbor crafted these moon runes in a couple of hours. Because Celebrimbor was in the process of setting up the new forge for the first time when Halbrand arrived. Then it starts raining, and I think it's pretty clear that Sauron made it rain so that Celebrimbor would feel sorry for him, which means that Sauron's master plan was to fake an injury and do puppy dog eyes to try and trick his assistant. And then when that didn't work, he decided, well, I'll stand here and I'll make it be wet, and then maybe he'll let me in. And then Celebrimbor was like, he's still there. He must really want to come in. The smart thing to do would maybe be to trick the guards and mind control one of them to let you in, but I understand that doing the smart thing is dangerous new territory for the characters of Amazon's Middle-earth. Anyway, speaking of doing the smart thing, Celebrimbor personally goes out in the rain to tell Halbrand to leave, or he will be removed by force, which indicates that removing people by force is something that the guards do, which of course raises the question as to why they have not done this already. Celebrimbor informs Halbrand that he cannot treat with him any longer, before immediately beginning to treat with him.
I can treat with you no longer. She said you'd say that. Galadriel, you have spoken with her, well, haven't you? I have not. Not since she left for Lindon.
Then you know nothing of what's happened, nothing of the rings.
Sauron then proceeds to manipulate Celebrimbor, and the way he does this is to suggest that he knows what has happened with the rings, which immediately causes Celebrimbor to become interested. He was characterized in Season 1 as wanting to create beautiful and powerful things that would inspire greatness. Him wanting to know if he was successful is entirely in character, which Sauron would know, hence him making this appeal. Sauron then suggests that Gil-galad doesn't care about Celebrimbor because he did not send him a letter.
What about the High King? Surely he wouldn't neglect to send word of...
The first seeds of doubt that are sown in Celebrimbor's mind are entirely reliant upon the fact that this letter never arrived in Eregion, and we do not yet know why this happened. Someone attacked the courier. This someone cannot have been Sauron, and this someone must have known that a message was being sent from Lindon to Eregion. This may be explained later, or alternatively, I guess we will never revisit this crucial plot beat. Perhaps it was just some bandits who were like, hey, move over, it's our turn to be involved in the plot. So, Celebrimbor letting Halbrand into Eregion and having a chat with him does seem to be a dumb decision, but given what he knows, it isn't actually as bad as it may appear. They established a friendship at the end of Season 1, Halbrand helped him craft something amazing, and Celebrimbor is not the kind of asshole to just leave a friend standing in the rain. Most importantly, however, Celebrimbor does not know that Halbrand is Sauron, nor does he have any reason to suspect that he is. Why does Celebrimbor not know that Halbrand is Sauron? And no, I'm not talking about the missing letter. We need to go earlier than that. The reason why Celebrimbor does not know that Halbrand is Sauron is because Galadriel hid that information from him. She just kind of said, Celebrimbor, don't you dare talk to Halbrand again. Don't ask why, because I'm not ready to hit that part of my character arc. Just don't talk to Halbrand again. I have already discussed why Galadriel did this, but essentially, this means that Celebrimbor not having a clue as to the danger he is in is a direct result of Galadriel's arrogance and pridefulness. And given where this goes, this means that Galadriel is the reason why Celebrimbor was able to be corrupted by Sauron. If this is ever acknowledged, then thumbs up. But I think we both know that that is not going to happen. Anyway, this next part is rather important. It is, in fact, possibly the most important plot moment that has happened so far in Rings of Power. So I am going to take this very slowly to make sure I hit every step along the way. Celebrimbor asks Halbrand if the rings worked, and he is told that they worked wonders and the elves are now safe. Halbrand continues that he did not come to toast the elven rings, but to plead with him to make rings for men. The fact that this is Sauron's opening move indicates that he was perhaps hoping that Celebrimbor would agree, as it makes some logical sense for Halbrand, ostensibly a man, to want rings of power for his own race. Had this worked, it is anyone's guess as to what Sauron would have done next, but unfortunately this does not work because Celebrimbor responds that the risks of men being corrupted by power are too high. However, he does not realize that he has just been asked by a man to create a ring of power, something that apparently he knows can corrupt men, which means that Celebrimbor has just been asked by someone whom he believes to be susceptible to corruption to create powerful magical rings that will corrupt the hearts of men. In other words, some alarm bells should probably be ringing. Halbrand then suggests that he knows about the current dilemma facing the dwarves, and this is where things start to get a little spicy. He explains that his name is not Halbrand, he is not a king, he is not a Southlander, and he is not a mortal. And by this point, perhaps the second alarm bell should have started ringing, because this man has just admitted that he has deceived you. As for whether it is reasonable for Celebrimbor to suspect at any point during this conversation that this man is Sauron, I'd say probably not, thanks entirely to Galadriel's selfish actions at the end of Season 1. Sauron then suggests that he is an envoy of the Valar, sent to Middle-earth in its time of need. He does some basic bitch magical bullshit, including disappearing, opening the doors, and making the fire start roaring, and his disembodied voice then says, I have walked through the dust and the deserts of faraway lands in search of an artist possessing the craft to save all of Middle-earth. I can bring you the knowledge none other possesses. I can unlock your grandest abilities, and when our work is complete, never again will the world overlook you as the mere scion of Fëanor, but forevermore revere you.
The Lord of the Rings.
He then puts on a wig and assumes the identity of Annatar, the envoy of the Valar, the Lord of Gifts. Hey, this guy looks familiar. Is he copying my wig? So this scene is the beginning of the end for Middle-earth. Sauron has just tricked Celebrimbor into believing that he is an extremely powerful being who wants to save everyone. Now, I just have a handful of questions that might be answered, but given Rings of Power's embarrassing track record, my guess is that these will either not be answered in any coherent manner or they will be flat out ignored.
When Galadriel discovered the truth, she cast me out.
Why would Galadriel cast out an envoy of the Valar, and why wouldn't Galadriel want Celebrimbor to treat with an envoy of the Valar? Celebrimbor accepts that this is what happened, but he doesn't question it whatsoever. Given that Celebrimbor is the greatest of elven smiths, why would Annatar have wandered through faraway lands to find someone capable of saving Middle-earth? Surely Celebrimbor would be the most obvious and possibly only choice. Celebrimbor already knows how this man arrived in Eregion. He was supposedly critically wounded in battle and needed to be healed in Eregion, which should raise more than a handful of eyebrows and make Celebrimbor wonder what the fuck sequence of batshit insanity, also known as Season 1 of Rings of Power, led an envoy of the Valar to get stabbed in the Southlands whilst fighting orcs in an attempt to look for a really good blacksmith. Why would Annatar hide his true identity from Galadriel, and why would Annatar reveal his true identity to her if his objective is to locate someone who can help him craft magical rings to save Middle-earth? This is what Sauron claims is what happened, and Celebrimbor does not question it. And finally, why would Celebrimbor accept that an envoy of the Valar would need help from an elven smith to save Middle-earth? I am not suggesting that Celebrimbor should have been cognizant of all of the question marks that I have just highlighted, because he was understandably shown to be very emotional at the apparent success of the Elven Rings, followed by being in the apparent presence of an envoy of the Valar. But what I am saying is that these question marks exist, and Celebrimbor should absolutely be aware of all of the above, and so this should all be addressed at some point. I am fully expecting, however, that he will not question anything, and from here on out, full steam ahead, Celebrimbor and Annatar are going on a whirlwind adventure. I wish I could praise how Sauron conducts himself in this scene, and whilst he is of course eternally constrained by the skill of the writers, he does a much better job tricking Celebrimbor than he did with Galadriel. The writers are paying lip service to the idea of having Sauron appeal to what Celebrimbor wants, in that he targets Celebrimbor's desire to be remembered for doing great things. But this essentially amounts to flattery, and one would think that this should not have been enough to distract Celebrimbor from considering any of the things that I mentioned above. Sauron also leans hard on the suggestion that Celebrimbor desires power, as he concludes his monologue by telling him that he can be the Lord of the Rings. Now, this is fucking cringe, but I have said before that cringe and bad are not the same thing. The reason why this seems like manipulative horseshit is because the show is leveraging the name and title of a beloved story and is using it as the dramatic climax that we are supposed to believe will cause Celebrimbor to fall under Sauron's sway. The writers are relying heavily on the emotional connection that the audience will have with the phrase, "the Lord of the Rings," and they are exploiting the reverence that the audience likely has for these words to help them tell their story. The reason why this is shit from a more general storytelling perspective is because Celebrimbor has not been depicted as someone who wants to be really, really powerful. He has been characterized as very loyal to Gil-galad and having a desire to make the world a better place.
An age ago, our kind brought war to these shores. I want to fill them with beauty, to grow beyond petty works of jewel craft and devise something of real power.
Celebrimbor wants to create things that are powerful, not to be powerful. Sauron's manipulation opens by suggesting that Celebrimbor is the key to saving Middle-earth, but this then quickly transforms into him tempting him with obtaining power and status for himself.
I can bring you the knowledge none other possesses. I can unlock your grandest abilities. Never again will the world overlook you as the mere scion of Feanor, but forevermore revere you, the Lord of the Rings.
This scene is on the way to being half decent, but it is very scattered in its approach and relies entirely on multiple absurd conveniences, which is not what I would call excusable in a scene as pivotal as this. The actual contents of this scene in isolation I don't have any major problems with, because I think that a lot of the problems I have mentioned can be temporarily hand-waved, given that Celebrimbor believes that he is in the presence of essentially an angel. But, as with any such scenes in Rings of Power, the problem is what came before and what will come after. And as a reminder, all of this relies entirely upon the message from Gil-galad not reaching Eregion. In a normal TV show, I would obviously expect that this will be explained at some point, but Rings of Power is not a normal TV show. Rings of Power is the kind of TV show in which crucial plot information is delivered to the main characters because an unnamed spy found all the answers and wrote them down for them to read, only to never be mentioned again. Rings of Power is not a story that unfolds in a tightly coherent manner in which setups have payoffs and causes have effects. Rings of Power is absolutely the kind of story that will pull this kind of bullshit and just have, oh no, the message didn't get there, what luck, anyway, moving on. If anything, this plot beat with the missing message is even more important than the aforementioned convenient unnamed spy in Season 1, because this message being lost directly allows Sauron to manipulate Celebrimbor, which leads to all further conflict involving the various Rings of Power. I may well be getting ahead of myself, because I have not watched past episode 2 at this point, and so maybe they will elaborate on this, but it would not fucking surprise me if they did not. It is, however, nice to see Sauron manipulate someone successfully by remembering not to throw in, by the way, I'm evil, at the most inopportune time.
Together, we can save this Middle-earth.
Save or rule?
I see no difference.
What, are you retarded?
Cut back to Lindon, where Gil-galad orders Galadriel to depart in the morning for Eregion. It turns out that Elrond has changed his mind after his discussion with James Corden. Much to Galadriel's dismay, Elrond is going to be in charge of her rather than the other way around, and we cut away dramatically because obviously we've got to go to Khazad-Dum for a double whammy of Cliffhanger. Durin receives an invitation from Celebrimbor. Oh no, it's time for... it's the credits. Fuck you. Tune in next week. So now that we have reached the end of episode 2, let's quickly revisit each plot and work out how the writers decided to go about achieving their goals, starting with the Khazad-Dum plot. The writers needed to establish what has actually happened to Durin and Disa following the events of Season 1, and they spend most of their time showing us Disa attempting to get the Durins to reconnect. Why exactly she is doing this is not entirely clear. It may be purely in an attempt to fix the string of bad luck, or potentially she has a more sinister motive, in that she wants to ensure that when the king dies, he leaves control over Khazad-Dum to her and her husband, rather than Durin's brother that was mentioned a single time in Season 1 and has not ever appeared on screen. The writers also needed to show that the dwarves are not doing particularly well, which will likely explain their eagerness to accept the Rings of Power from Sauron later in the series. Overall, this plotline is head and fucking shoulders above the others. There are things to criticize, as I have, but this is all relatively minor. The Nori plot continues to be a complete waste of time, and the only thing that has changed by the time we reach the end of the episode is that Nori and Poppy are dead. Except that obviously they are not dead, because why do we need to worry about consequences in Rings of Power? The writers are just going to make there be a giant trampoline off screen, so they're fine. The only things that were achieved in this plotline were the introduction of Rasputin as the leader of the Androgynites, and the most contrived scene in the history of contrivances in which they fight off Skeletor with a tornado. The Galadriel plot requires that she and Elrond go off on their adventure to rescue Celebrimbor from Sauron. Given how episode 1 ended, a huge amount of work needed to be done to pull this off, and in true Rings of Power fashion, the writers take the easy way out at every turn, explaining very little, and hoping that people will just kind of accept the general gist of what they are trying to do. Episode 1 ended with Galadriel, Gil-galad, and James Corden embracing the rings and realizing that they healed the Tree of Symbolism. Elrond disapproved of this, as he wanted the rings destroyed regardless of any potential upside. This means that the writers primarily needed to accomplish two things. Galadriel needs to have a reason to go to Eregion, and Elrond needs to change his mind about the rings and go with her. The way the writers direct Galadriel towards Eregion is by having Gil-galad allow her to keep the ring when he is directly motivated to do the opposite, and by using the ring to inject visions into her brain. It is entirely unclear how much of Galadriel's, Gil-galad's, and James Corden's actions are as a result of their rings influencing their behavior, and the writers take full advantage of this vagary. Either the writers are using this remarkably convenient plot device to draw her to Eregion, or Sauron is actively using the ring to draw her to Eregion. It is at this point unclear which it is, and if Sauron wants Galadriel to be in Eregion for some reason, then I will wait until this is revealed to comment on it. Elrond changing his mind and going with Galadriel relies entirely on two crucial scenes: his discussion with Galadriel, and his subsequent discussion with James Corden. Neither of these scenes function whatsoever, and the writers do not seem to understand what Elrond's relationship with either of these characters actually is. But Elrond needs to go to Eregion, so I guess, yeah, he believes that they need to stop Sauron making more evil rings, whilst clearly believing that the 3 elven rings are evil, and repeatedly acknowledging that everything Galadriel says and does could well have been influenced by Sauron. The Eregion plot simply requires that Celebrimbor falls under Sauron's influence, which is probably the most important plot beat in the story so far. The stuff with Annatar, for the moment, is functional, because we can lean pretty heavily on Celebrimbor being in awe at being in the presence of an envoy of the Valar. But the pieces required to set up this interaction simply do not work and are absurd. Everything relating to the letter from Lindon is ridiculous, manipulative, and contrived. The ripples of Galadriel's decision at the end of Season 1 are felt here rather critically, because her decision allows Sauron to get a hold on Celebrimbor. And I think it is a fair assumption that neither what happened to the letter, nor Galadriel's complicitness in Celebrimbor's corruption, will ever be mentioned. But if they are, you can be damn sure that I will re-examine them at that point. Overall, Episode 2 is absolutely better than Episode 1. This is in large part due to Disa, and in smaller part due to the Khazad-Dum stuff in general. There are rather massive questions relating to Annatar and the rings that have yet to be answered, and how those questions are answered, or if they are answered, will certainly colour my opinion of this episode by the time we reach the end of the season. It is quite remarkable how bad of a show Rings of Power is in general that this particular episode ends up being probably the strongest episode of the entire series so far, and yet still contains such unfathomably terrible gerbil shit as the tornado moment in the desert. As for what will happen next, I can't wait for the moment when Galadriel and Elrond arrive in Eregion, because the writers will have to work out a way to explain or hide Annatar's presence without tripping any tripwires in either Elrond or Galadriel's brains, which I expect will be highly entertaining. Other than that, episode 2 of season 2 of Rings of Power sits in that awkward place between entirely forgettable and devilishly awful. Thank you, as always, guys, for watching. I hope you are enjoying my coverage of season 2. Please drop me a like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more, and I will be right back with you once I have experienced episode 3. Stay tuned. See you next time.